So as we, let's kind of gather, it's 4 minutes after now, and I expected we'd be just a little bit late this morning with the Get Connected Sunday going on. But I'd like to just start by welcoming all of you to our first program for the Adult Education Council. We'll be meeting every Sunday at 11 o'clock here, with the exceptions of the Sunday after Thanksgiving, the 2 Sundays after Christmas and Easter and Palm Sunday. Other than that, we'll be here through May at 11 o'clock, and we have a whole variety of programs. Spiritual development, which is the first 3 weeks, then a social justice, Bible and theology, arts and culture. We're trying to encompass as much as possible the life of the church and the growth that we all need as individual Christians. So in addition, I want to announce that Tom R. is going to be having 4 sessions on the book of Philippians on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock, starting a week from Tuesday, which I think is the 17th. So those 4 weeks, and those classes I think are going to be in Borwell also here. So they will not be on Zoom. They will be recorded, and later there will be special sessions instead of the hybrid like we're doing today on Zoom and in person. This will just be in person, and then later there will just be sessions, 2 sessions that are recorded. So enough of the announcements. All the programs, there's a card back there. If you didn't get it at the Get Connected or after this, you can get the whole list of programs for the fall. So let's begin with prayer. Lord, we thank you that we have this opportunity to gather as your church, quiet our minds and open us so that we may hear your word for our lives. Through Christ we pray. Amen. This morning, as the first part of our spirituality of caregiving, we have our teacher as Annette Molesky. Annette is the director of the Center for Life and Learning and has been in that role for the past 2.5 years. Annette is a person who felt called to be a teacher and has spent the last 30 years as a teacher, first as an English teacher in Western Michigan, and then she went back to get a master's in ministry degree and became an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church. So in that role, she has been a college chaplain, a bereavement coordinator, has been the learning support person at a college. She's helped people who want to go to seminary go through those steps. And now she's working with people who are 60 and over at the doing learning, social, and other growth endeavors at the Center for Life and Learning. She'll probably say a little bit more about it, but all I know about the Center for Life and Learning is that it was started nearly 60 years ago by the Board of Deacons here at Fourth Church, and is a significant ministry, both to some church members and to many people in the community. I think there's over 400 members in the Center for Life and Learning. So with that introduction, Annette, please welcome her. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning. I was remarking, there we go. I was remarking to Jeannie, I said, it's sort of like church, nobody wants to sit up front, right? But I know some of you in the back, so I can still call on you. There we go. So yes, I am the director of the Center for Life and Learning. I'm very excited to take on that role. One of the things that drew me here to Fourth was the amount of activity and the community outreach that I saw and that I heard about through the interview process. And I was so enthralled with that I felt like this was going to be a good place for me to land professionally. As a deacon in the Episcopal Church, my primary role when I served in the church was outreach ministries. And so I worked a lot with trying to connect our church folks in Lansing to the opportunities around in the community. Some that were near us, we were near the MSU campus, and some that were more in town and seemed a little more difficult of a stretch for some of our people to reach out to. So being a person who is connected to community is very important to me. And I appreciate the invitation from Jana and the committee to be here today to speak about this topic. So I try to always have a plan. This is my plan for what's going to happen in the next hour. And it may or may not go this way. But we'll get started and we'll see where we end up. Oh, hello to those on Zoom. Sorry about that. I didn't acknowledge you there. But so you know a little bit about me. Yes, before I came here, I was a high school English teacher. And before that, I served as the director of a tutoring program and training program at a community college where I ran 3 centers for our students, as well as a writing center. And then I also helped train some of the adjunct faculty in being presenters and classroom management. So partly because of that background, but I also want us to be sort of on the same page. I want to talk about what these words mean, because they can mean different things for different people, and they're kind of heavy words, right? They're kind of big words. Last year, you might remember, I did a presentation with H.D. Mitchell, and we talked about the spirituality of aging. And can anybody really just think for a second, don't say it out loud, just think for yourself, do you have a really good handle on how you could explain spirituality? I don't. I'm going to try. And I'm going to share with you what I have found out and then share with you my thoughts on that. But I think it's kind of hard to define because it seems so big. So one of the best definitions I found was from the Royal Academy of Psychiatrists. And they define spirituality as knowing that our lives have significance in a context beyond the mundane, everyday existence at the level of biological needs that drive selfishness and aggression. It means knowing that we are a significant part of a purposeful unfolding of life in our universe. Sorta helps, maybe, right? I guess for me, the easiest way as I think of it in spirituality is learning to grow into the fact that I am part of something much bigger than myself. And through that building of that connection, I grow personally, and my connection to everyone I come in contact with also grows. Okay? So I gave you a minute. I want you to turn to someone next to you, close to you. Talk to them. How would you define spirituality? If I said, oh, here, Beth, you're in charge now. What are you going to say? So turn to someone next to you and just share that. Okay. Jana, I know you're kind of watching things online. Is there anybody online who would like to share with us what they thought of as spirituality? I'm not grading your answers. All right, so they're kind of quiet. How about somebody in the room? Oh, do we have the microphone? I'm going to ask you to use the microphone because we are Zooming this, and I want to make sure everybody can hear it. So please speak directly into the microphone.
There's someone over there.
Nope, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. In my mind, spirituality has to do with our behavior, probably when we're out of the church setting, seeing a need and appropriately trying to fill it without being intrusive. Loving people who sometimes the behavior makes them unlovable. Working with our own need sometimes to retort or be ugly when someone offends us. And we're drawing on our spiritual power, we're drawing on God's grace to do this. Now, being human, we're all imperfect, but I see this as a process we go through to try to hone ourselves into a more spiritual person.
Great, thank you. Anyone else like to share? Regan?
Roger has one word for spirituality, and that is relationship.
Oh, good word, good word. Yeah. And then you also shared connected, right? And then there's the other word, process, right? Oh, okay. Okay,
Which was, and it relates to yours, which is that spirituality is working about on our inner life. So then to build on Roger, so we can be better in a relationship to the external world.
great. All right. Our work here is done. Have a good day. Oh, Annette? Okay, maybe not.
Spirituality is the essence of the soul and how it connects in our world, not only to other people, but I also believe that animals have spirits.
Definitely, definitely. Good. Thank you. All right, so we've got that one pretty well covered. And this is what Henry Nouwen says about caregiving. Caregiving is about forming a relationship with another whom we might never have chosen to know. It's about doing all we do practically with the intention of growing into a relationship of respect, listening, presence, and truthfulness. So relationship, growing, process, listening, and there are practical physical aspects of that caring. Yes, did you have a question?
Just related to that first sentence, does this mean that this is only a discussion about caregivers towards strangers as opposed to towards loved ones?
No, this is taken from his book, The Spirituality of Caregiving. So this was just the quote that came up when I typed in, what is his definition of caregiving?
Because to me, caregiving seems to be part and parcel of wedding vows in sickness and in health and in the care that you might extend towards your biological family, towards your spouse's biological family, towards your chosen family, and so on. And this seems to be excluding all of that.
I don't think that was his intent. I think it's broader than just whom we might never have chosen to know. So I don't think it excludes those in our biological family. Okay? It's okay if we don't agree. This is how he defined it. This is one person's, yep. So what's your definition of caregiving? So turn to maybe a new person or the person that's close to you, talked about caregiving. Okay. So when I think of caregiving, and over the next 2 weeks, you're going to hear some versions as our other presenters, as we all talk about the spirituality of caregiving. For me, it's more about the connection between the caregiver and the care receiver. And I firmly believe that is a very mutual connection. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. So this is what I was thinking of when we were talking about connection, and in Nouwen's definition, it's like the pieces just sort of fit, right? It's the essence of that of relationship. Ideally, they fit perfectly, right? In a perfect world, it goes right together. Everything makes sense. We're all good. Everybody goes home happy. We do not live in a perfect world. We are not perfect people. We know that. So sometimes it looks like this. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's not so simple, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a couple minutes. So again, I think that essence for me is that connection between two people who are willing to be vulnerable to one another. That's the mutuality. They are vulnerable, they are accepting each other at that point. So when I'm the youngest and most adorable of my parents' 6 children. So this is just something you should all know about, right? So my siblings are quite a bit older than I am. And so most of my life, I was always literally the youngest one in the room. And my grandmother took care of me. She was my daycare person, right? So I'm always around older adults. And what I witnessed was the graciousness and the gracefulness with how my mother, who was an only child, navigated taking care of my older relatives. So not only how she took care of us as our mom, because she sort of has to, right? But also how she cared for her mother, her father, her stepfather, my aunt who had no children, my father. So I watched her do that. Did she do it perfectly? No. Were there days when she was a little short-tempered? Yes. Were there days that I'm sure she thought to herself, if I just packed a bag and left before they got up, would they even notice? Right? I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be truthful. But at the end of the day, at the end of her life, what I heard her say was, I would not have changed a thing. Because I learned about me. And I learned about God's presence for me, no matter what I was doing. Now, again, as sort of a smart alecky kid growing up, when my mom would say, take it to God in prayer, I would be like, what? Why? Prayer is not going to buy me the new tennis shoes. Prayer is not going to get me the ticket or the date to the homecoming dance. Come on, Mom. Thankfully, God didn't give up on me. I'm older and wiser. Well, older now. And I turned to prayer. Because again, for her, that was how she made that deeper connection and was able to get through all those tasks of caregiving that aren't so pleasant, right? So the first time that I personally had to be a caregiver was when I had these 4 little munchkins. I'd love to say these are not pictures of they sort of did look like this, to be honest. But I realized I had no pictures on my phone of when my kids were little. It was the 80s. I didn't even have a cell phone, right? So I didn't have a way to throw that up there. So our kids are relatively close in age. Our oldest was 8 when the baby was born. So they went, let me get this right now, 8, 5, 3, and then this one would have been 1. So it kind of, that's how they stepped down. Thankfully, again, through the grace of God, a lot of prayer, a lot of help from my mom, they grew up. This isn't even a current picture. I wish it was. Again, I don't have any on my phone. But here they are, pretty decent people. Not perfect by any means, but pretty good people. So I think I did an okay job. My former husband and I, we worked real hard at teaching them and showing them how to be good people in the world and how to care not only for one another, but the people around us. And some days it was real messy. Some days, when I grew, well, as I got older, I became a hospice chaplain and then a hospice caregiver in a hospice home in Lansing. So we would have 3 guests living in the home at a time, and I was one of the caregivers, which meant I was hands-on with the caregiving. Some days when I would walk in, it would look like this. Be that nice quiet time. And I could sit and I could talk with our guests. We might read a book together. Sometimes we'd just sit and watch TV. But it didn't always look like this. Sometimes I got to hear great stories Oh, I would hear stories about when I was a hospice chaplain about the things that they used to do when they were kids and how they would run around. This was in the Detroit area, how they would run around in Detroit and the things that they could get into. I had one woman, oh, it was such a joy. She decided that she no longer wanted to be at her home where she was living. It was this beautiful care home. The people were wonderful. And she very quietly turned to me and said, "Do you think you could pull your car up and we could get out before they could catch us?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What you have in mind?" She said, "Well, I think there are a couple of gentlemen waiting at Tiger Stadium with our tickets, and I don't want to miss that game." And I said, "That's a brilliant idea." And so we began to construct how we were going to both get out of this house. And she was fairly immobile at this time. She had it all set. We were all going to go, but we had to stop and get a little bit of gin. When I said gin, I meant playing cards. She didn't think we could play cards I said, okay. We had this great plan. And then she looked at me and she said, "Oh, but Margie's going to come by today." And I said, "Oh, I forgot about Margie." She said, "Margie's my best friend." And she talked to me about Margie. And I said, "Well, why don't I call Margie and I'll tell her the plan and then we can go get her. But for right now," and now let me tell you what, she was pulling herself out of the bed ready to go. I said, "But why don't we just rest for a minute, take a nap, because it's going to be a long game." She said, "That's perfect." So she quietly fell asleep, and I sat with her for a little bit longer. And then I went out and I was talking with the people who run the home, and she said, "Oh, Margie was her best friend. Margie passed away just a few months ago, and she really misses her." And I will tell you right now, standing there, I felt the grace of God pour over me because I had gotten to share this very, albeit silly, interaction with this wonderful woman. And I got to know her in a slightly different way. Now, other days, especially as a caregiver at the house, weren't so pleasant. I might have to clean up a guest and their bed and the floor after an accident. They might be very angry because they're there and they can't do things for themselves. Their family might be angry at us for whatever reason. And yet, every time I would clean up or I would feel that anger, I would have that conversation, I still felt God's presence. Because the emotions are not bad emotions, right? We tend to say, these are the bad things. Don't feel those things. These are the good things. They're emotions. We all have them. And I could recognize them. And I had people that I could talk to, the volunteer coordinator and other volunteers at the house where I could come and say, "Hey, this is what's happening with so-and-so. Yep, we noticed he's getting more agitated. Here's what we're able to do." And always what it came back to was, we're doing this work because it's important work. It's the work we are given to do. Not everybody who volunteered was Christian. Not everybody who was in the home was Roman Catholic. But all of us had a sense that this place and this work was connected to God working in our community. And it was vital work. And it was important work. And some days I would leave in tears. Some days when I knew a patient was near the end and when I knew a guest was near the end, I would just sit in my car and I would pray. First, I'd thank my mom for teaching me to pray and teaching me to lean back on that. But I had to just sit in that moment, make that personal connection for me with God before I could move on. That, for me, is the spirituality of caregiving. And it was also recognizing when I had my limitations. So when my mother became unable to care for herself. Again, remember, I'm the youngest, most adorable of 6 children. My dad was gone. I still had 4 children at home. I worked part-time. My husband traveled for work, so a lot of times I was single mom. We had 2 dogs. I think we also had a hamster at that point and probably some fish. And my brothers, who lived in the same town with my mom, and we lived in Grand Rapids, she lived in Ionia. We can't take care of her. Now, neither of them had kids at home anymore. Yes, they were working. You're going to have to take care of her. So we had a conversation. We moved my mom in with us for a short time. She didn't want to be a burden. What do we hear as caregivers? I don't want to be a burden. What do we think ourselves? I don't want to be a burden. You know what? It's okay to be a burden sometimes. But I had to find a place for her because our house was pretty busy and active. I was concerned with work schedule. She was on a number of medications. But we moved her to Grand Rapids. Her doctors was there. So it did make sense in a way. But I felt very alone because my brother said, you do it. And there were days when I was very resentful and very angry. But I talked to my mom every day. I visited her almost every other day, even when she had to be moved to another home that wasn't quite as close. And I would get home exhausted. And I'd get up and do it all again the next day. And my kids would say, Mom, aren't you tired? I would say, yeah, I am. So, because they had the example of my own, watching my mom take care of other relatives, of how I was taking care of my mom, they would sit me down on the couch and they would bring me a book. Yep, even the 3 and 5-year-old. And they would sit and they would read to me. Caregiving matters, right? So at the end of the day, as I said, it's about that relationship. It's about learning about one another. It's taking the time to listen. It's taking the time, sometimes just for yourself, to pray, to read a book, to take a nap. And it really is okay to say you're tired, or you're mad, or you're frustrated. It's okay to say that. Find the people that can support you. Sometimes it might be at church. Maybe you're part of a Bible study group. Maybe you're part of the women's group here or the knitting group. Is there someone there that you can connect with just for a minute, just to say, you know, I love my mom, my spouse, my child, but sometimes I get tired. We have the Replogle Center here through the church. It's a great resource to connect with. Renew yourself. Remember what we said about spirituality? It's also yours, right? It's you. It's renewing who you are and whose you are and becoming the person you're meant to be, bigger than yourself. Part of this huge community of God, right? So take care of yourself because you're part of the relationship as the caregiver. Now, on the flip side of that, I have been the care receiver. And I would love to say I did it very graciously and I was very appreciative. I wasn't always. I'm going to be honest. I was appreciative certainly later on. But in that moment, I do remember it was knee surgery. And my husband was trying to help me with something and he wasn't doing it the way I wanted it done because it was wrong. And I told him so with not so nice words. And he walked away. And I sat and I thought, where did that come from? And I had to sit with that. And I had to sit with that anger and that frustration. And I thought, it's my own vanity. It is my own ego right now who says that I know how the best way to do whatever it had. I don't even now remember what that thing was that he was helping me with. He certainly couldn't get it right. I thought, wow, where did that come from? How unfair. He can't read my mind. He doesn't know what I wanted exactly because I didn't tell him. He was just trying to reach out and help so that I wouldn't fall or I wouldn't whatever. And so we had to have that conversation. And it wasn't easy for me to admit that I was wrong. Like, I shouldn't have snapped at you. Here's why I think I did that. And we had that conversation, and it opened up another piece of our relationship to one another, another level of truth, another way of seeing one another. And I think that's one of the gifts of being the caregiver and the care receiver. Both entities have something to give in that relationship. That's what makes it a relationship. And I know Jeannie's going to talk about that on the third week, a little bit more about that balance. So when you were deciding to come here, when you think of, just think of caregiving now beyond your definition, when you think of caregiving, do you think more, I don't know if I can find the picture. Do you think, my immediate thought is someone who's very sick, you know, that one, the first slide there I had holding in the hands, one was older, definitely one was younger. Is that your vision of caregiving? When you hear that word, just like when I hear elderly, I automatically think of someone who is either in a wheelchair or very feeble and can't. That isn't caregiving. I mean, it is, right? But I think when we think in those very black and white terms, we tend to negate that the care receiver still has gifts to give. There are still strengths that they can share. Let me share one more story with you. My oldest brother was a deacon, an ordained deacon in the Catholic Church. And so when I was starting my process, he was one of the people I turned to with a lot of questions. Even though totally different denominations, the service was the same. And what we were called to do was the same. And for the first time ever, I talked to him about faith and my relationship with God and spirituality. And it was marvelous. Now, my brother at that point in his life was paralyzed from the neck down. He had a very rare form of muscular dystrophy. It was very progressive. Once it began, it moved very, very quickly. At that point, he could no longer care for himself. He was in the Veterans Hospital in Battle Creek. He had worked there for 30 years as their maintenance, director of maintenance for them. And now he was a patient. And the nurses that he used to get there at 4 a.m. to shovel the snow for them were now wiping his butt. The men that he used to be in charge of and the women were now coming to work with him and making adjustments around his room and helping with the lift. This is a man who had taken care of everybody, who had served in Vietnam, who had been a caregiver. And now all he could do was think and talk. And at one point he turned to me and he said, you know, what really sucks about all this? He and his wife had been married at that point, gosh, trying to think age-wise, I was 6, close to 50 years. I can't even hold my wife's hand. I can't reach out and touch my wife. I can't hold my grandchildren. What could I say to that? So we both sat for a moment and we both cried. And I wiped his face, which was very hard for him to take as well. I'm like, dude, look, I can't have anybody coming in and having you look like this. You're quite frankly a mess. It's my brother, I could say that, right? And we laughed for a minute, and then he looked at me and he said, you know what? There are things I can do. And I said, okay. He said, when people come in here, I can stop and listen to them. I can ask them how they are doing. I can pray. I can read the gospel when we have church service on Sunday if someone holds the Bible for me. You know what? I can still preach, right? So suddenly there were all these gifts that he had sort of forgotten. And that's exactly what he did. And again, it was hard, a little hard for both of us, especially since I'm the baby, like I said, for him to receive that from me. It was a little hard for me to give some of that care because he'd always been the one who took care of me. I was his shadow as a kid. But what a gift. What a gift for both of us to have that time together. Well, I think you might agree with me at certain ages, it's not always easy to build relationships, right? It can be awkward. It can be frightening. So how do we do it? So I don't know if this is a habitat. I'm trying to look at the t-shirts. Habitat for Humanity. My kids used to volunteer for that in different churches I belong to. You know, you got to talk to one another, right? When you're doing something like that. You have to learn about one another. You have to learn about one another's strengths. So we're going to try a little something. I have a set of cards. I'm going to ask you to take one. Don't think too hard about it. Just sort of draw a card at random. Okay? Don't think a lot about it. Put it down for just a second. So we're going to take a minute. We're going to learn about one another. We're going to be vulnerable to one another for a minute. And we're going to listen. So I'd like you to look at your card. Some of them have pictures. Some of them have words. Some have both. So you can choose either side. So I want you, I'm going to stop talking. We're just going to look at that picture for a moment or those words. And then I ask you to find someone, maybe someone at your table, or if you want to get up for a minute and go find someone else, one other person. You guys can do 3 because it'll be easier for you. Yeah. Yeah. Try to find one other person and share what you are thinking about that picture. What does that picture mean to you? What do those words mean to you? Some of them are prompts like, share about a time you felt close to God. Okay? So Jana, if you want to maybe grab a couple of the questions or, great, thank you. So go ahead and share. All right. So you just practiced. You just practiced being a little bit vulnerable. And you practice being honest and trying to connect to someone else. How did that feel? Because you already knew each other. Okay. Was it hard to do that? Was it hard to be open to the person next to you? Oh, okay. Go ahead. Oh, Ted, microphone. Thank you.
We hadn't met before. I will admit this about myself. Some of you might guess it. I'm a good interviewer. I'm a coach. And so he ended up sharing his speed bump, or what I call plot twists, with me. One thing I did, because I teach listening actually, is I did interject stuff about me along the way. But so he told me about his speed bump, and I told him about us getting married in Buchanan Chapel in 2015. I really feel like we had a nice conversation.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
I thought it was fun. I hope Roger did, because we actually live in the same town and We've known one another for a long time, except we didn't know anything about what we just talked about. So I enjoyed that, Roger.
Good. Anyone else like to share? I know, sometimes it's hard to be vulnerable, right? Good. Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. So one of the things we were just talking about here for a minute is how hard it really is to be the care receiver also. I've never been a man, so I don't know what it's like for men, but I can say from a woman's perspective, most of my life I have been thought of as the person who gives the care. And so again, when I've had those instances where I've had to receive the care, it's been excruciating for me. And I will be the last one to admit that I'm about ready to fall down because I'm either in pain or I have not slept in days. I am getting much better at asking for help when I need it because I'm learning more about vulnerability and the importance of that. So let me just share one more quick story and then we'll wrap it up here. When I was caretaking for my mom, one of the things that made it very, very hard for me was when I would go to see her, she would start in with a litany of everything she was upset about. So things that had happened before I was born, old family hurts, old family secrets, and then she would start in on everything that was going wrong at the home or what they were or weren't doing for her, and it just felt to me like she was always mad. And that was not how I remembered her as a mom, so that was a little hard. And then I would go like the next time and my husband would go with me or my kids would be with me, but particularly when my husband was with me, and she would be all smiles and everything was wonderful. And do you know how good they are to me here at the, and she would go on and on about how wonderful the nurses were and the staff that brought her food and how they would take her outside and on it. And I was like, really? Now I never said anything, right? But I was sitting there incredulous, like, just yesterday, you were telling me that you were gonna, bust out of here, whatever. And I carried that and I was so hurt. And I remember saying at one point crying to my husband, he said, well, she's always liked me best. Now, yeah, let's just say that came up later. We're no longer together. But what I had to realize that really was a gift she gave me, that anger. Because I was the only one in her life that she could be that vulnerable and that real with. It still made it hard to hear it, but now, and after she passed, I could say, and thanks to my best friend who said that to me, Annette, how many people would come and go in her life every day? And she could not say that to one other person. She chose you. And because my best friend is a caregiver to me, she said, talk to me about what that felt like. So I want to leave you with the idea, the thought. There are gifts that all of us have to give, whether we're the caregiver or the care receiver. And as we grow and mature in our own spirituality, I hope you can recognize those gifts. And I hope you can be grateful for those gifts. And you can thank that person. So thank you for being with me today, for taking on this class. Reverend Nancy Benson-Nicole and Reverend Amy Pagliarella will be with you next week. So they're going to talk about some spiritual practices. They're going to continue the same topic of spirituality and caregiving. And then Jeannie Forrest will be with you kind of to give us the big picture and wrap us all up. And you're going to get to see the slide of balance that really spurred me for this today. So thank you. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Good and gracious God, thank you for the beauty of this glorious day. Thank you for giving us this day so full of possibilities. Guide us as we make our way through it. Open our hearts to those miracles, large and small, that you have for us. And give us the grace and the strength to be your vessels of love in this world today and all our days. Amen. Take care.